Two names, one soul. Everyone wears a mask. Most people just call it a morning routine. The tie knotted at the throat. The shoes that say, "I belong here." The face arranged into the correct expression for the occasion, confident in the boardroom, friendly at the coffee machine, controlled at the quarterly review. We perform ourselves daily with such practiced fluency that we stop noticing it's a performance at all. Callum Reeves noticed. He had noticed for 35 years the specific daily effort of presenting a self that was only partly true, of moving through a world that had been built for one version of him and knew nothing about the other. He had learned to navigate that distance with a grace that looked, from the outside, like ease. A successful marketing career. A clean apartment in a city that asked few personal questions. A life organized, functional, and quietly incomplete. But every evening, when the last email was sent and the laptop lid came down and the city outside the window shifted from its daytime gray into the warm, complex palette of night, Callum Reeves did something that changed the temperature of his entire world. He became Celeste. And Celeste, it turned out, was the truest thing about him. The city was Chicago, not the postcard version, not the tourist brochure with its soaring lakefront and symmetrical skyline, but the real Chicago, the one that exists in the neighborhoods between the landmarks. Callum had lived in it for 9 years, transplanted from a smaller city in Ohio where his family still lived, and where the word conservative applied not just to politics but to the entire architecture of social expectation. His apartment was on the 4th floor of a building in Lincoln Park, not large, but his in every detail. He had taken considerable care with it over the years. The walls were a soft, warm white. There were books on every available surface, organized not alphabetically, but by mood, the ones that comforted him on the left shelf, the ones that challenged him in the middle, the ones he returned to so often they'd stop staying on the shelf at all. A small kitchen with a window that caught the afternoon sun. A bathroom with good lighting, which mattered more than it once had. And the wardrobe. The wardrobe occupied the entirety of the bedroom's east wall, a custom unit he had built 18 months ago, replacing the narrow single-door closet that had previously required him to keep things in labeled boxes under the bed. The new wardrobe had sections. One for Callum's suits, dress shirts, the reliable masculine wardrobe of a professional man who presented himself well, and one for Celeste, which was the section he loved. Celeste's section had been assembled over many years with the care and consideration of someone who understood that clothing is not decoration. It is language. Each piece in that wardrobe said something specific and true about taste, about identity, about the particular beauty of a self that has been allowed to choose. There were dresses in jewel tones and pastels, skirts in structured A-lines and flowing middies, blouses in silk and cotton and jersey, each chosen for the way they moved against skin and light. A dedicated drawer for lingerie, delicate, beautiful things that Callum had learned to love not for any external reason but for the simple, private pleasure of wearing something that had been made with care and softness in mind. A shelf for wigs, a deep chestnut wave that fell past the shoulders, a sleek black bob cut clean at the jaw, a soft honey blonde with a gentle natural curl. And at the bottom, organized by heel height and occasion, the shoes Celeste's particular indulgence, ranging from elegant ballet flats to a pair of black satin stilettos that Callum had spent 3 months learning to walk in and now wore with the unconscious ease of someone who had never done otherwise. The wardrobe was a world. Every evening, Callum stepped into it and came out someone who felt entirely like himself. The transformation, and Callum always thought of it as transformation rather than dressing up, because the distinction mattered enormously, followed a ritual that had evolved over years into something almost meditative. It began with the shedding of the day. He would come home sometimes still sharp with the particular adrenaline of a good presentation, sometimes drained and gray with the accumulated weight of meetings and deadlines and the constant low-level performance that professional life required, and he would put his work things away with deliberate care. Suit jacket on its hanger, tie loosened and placed on the hook, shoes set neatly on the rack. It was important, this part, because it was the physical enactment of separation. The day, with its demands and its costume, was being set aside. Then the shower. He took his time with it in a way that Callum in the morning never did. He used the good products, the shea butter wash, the conditioning treatment, the exfoliating scrub on the days before he knew he'd be doing his makeup. He emerged from the bathroom warm and clean and in the deliberate, unhurried state of mind that the ritual required. Then the makeup. This was the part that had taken the longest to learn and that he had come to love most completely. He had started years ago with drugstore products and tutorial videos and hands that trembled with the weight of the unfamiliarity. He had applied foundation 3 shades too dark, liner so unsteady it looked drawn by a child, blush that sat on his face like a costume rather than a part of it. But he had practiced. With the patient, methodical commitment of someone who understood that skill is just desire applied consistently over time, he had practiced. Night after night, week after week, season after season, until the brushes in his hand moved with the same fluid confidence that a painter's hand acquires, not thinking about the motion, just executing it, the muscle memory doing the translation work between intention and result. By the time he was 35, Callum Reeves could do his makeup better than most women he knew. His foundation matched his skin tone exactly, warm undertones, a semi-matte finish that read as natural without being flat. His contouring was subtle and precise, doing the quiet architectural work of softening a jaw and lifting a cheekbone without announcing itself as technique. His eye looks ranged from the clean and simple a single coat of mascara and a softened liner flick to the more elaborate and dramatic, a smoky eye in burgundy and bronze, a sharp graphic liner that required an absolutely steady hand and several years of accumulated nerve. The lipstick was always the final step. There was something about lipstick, Callum had decided long ago, something about its combined symbolism and practicality that made it a perfect conclusion to the ritual. It was the last brushstroke, the signature at the bottom of the painting. The moment the mirror shifted from showing him what was there to confirming who had arrived. He would stand before the bathroom mirror in full makeup, wig in place, dress settled, shoes on, and really look at the person looking back. Celeste. Not performed. Not imagined. Not a fantasy or a costume or a coping mechanism. A person. His person. The one that the world didn't see on the days when he wore the suit and the tie and the careful professional smile. The one who was, in the truest possible sense, the most honest version of him. For several years, Celeste existed only within the apartment's 4 walls. This was not unhappiness, or not only unhappiness. Callum was careful to distinguish between the two when he thought about it honestly. The evenings he spent as Celeste were genuinely his best hours. He cooked elaborate dinners in a floral apron and ate them at his small kitchen table with a glass of wine and a novel, the city murmuring outside the window. He rearranged the furniture. He tried on outfits for no occasion beyond his own satisfaction. He read fashion photography with the considered, educated attention of someone who had learned to see it properly. He watched films he loved and sang along to music that made him feel entirely himself. These evenings were warm and full and real, but they were also, it must be said, quiet. The particular quietness of a life that has been lived mostly inward by necessity, not design, has a texture to it that you become so accustomed to that you stop recognizing it as a limitation. It feels like peace. It is peace, partially. But there's something underneath it that isn't peace, a low, persistent hunger for a different kind of witness. Not the mirror. Not the carefully curated photographs he sometimes took of himself in the good evening light for his own private archive. Something more alive, more reciprocal. The hunger for being seen. Not observed. Not surveilled. Not judged or catalogued or assessed. But seen in the way that a person is seen when another person looks at them with recognition and warmth and genuine interest. The specific nourishment of existing in another person's consciousness as your true self. Callum had been Celeste in private for 4 years before he understood that the hunger wasn't going away. It was, in fact, getting louder. The evening Celeste walked outside for the first time, it was late April. Callum had been thinking about it for 6 weeks. Not obsessively. Not with the clenched, anxious energy of someone dreading an ordeal, but with a careful, circling thoughtfulness of someone approaching something important and wanting to get it right. He had chosen a date mentally, then moved it when the weather was wrong. He had chosen an outfit, then reconsidered it twice. He had walked to his apartment door fully dressed on 2 previous evenings and turned around before reaching for the handle. On the third evening, he reached for the handle. The outfit he had finally settled on was deliberate in its approachability, a soft midi dress in dusty rose, long-sleeved, modest in its cut, but beautiful in its movement, the kind of dress that reads as elegant without demanding attention. His hair that evening was the honey blonde with a natural curl, which he had found tended to photograph warmly and read, in person, as entirely uncomplicated. A light makeup look, clean skin, defined brows, a warm terracotta lip. His low block-heeled mules, comfortable and quiet. He looked in the mirror one final time. "You look like a woman going for an evening walk," he told the reflection. "Because you are."
Go.
The night air hit him immediately cool, carrying the particular April scent of Chicago in bloom, car exhaust and budding trees and something faintly sweet from the bakery on the corner. He stood on the front step for a moment, orienting himself to the world outside, and then he walked. He had planned a route deliberate and well-considered, as all of his preparations were. 2 blocks south to the small park, once around the perimeter, 2 blocks back. 11 minutes at a normal pace, 12 if he was careful on the uneven pavement section near the gate. He walked it in 15, not because he was slow, because about halfway through, he had stopped fighting the urge to notice things, the way the park lights cast long warm shadows on the path, the couple walking their dog ahead of him, the distant sound of music from a window above the treeline. He stopped walking through the world and started walking in it, the way you do when you're not spending all your energy managing your own fear. People passed him. A man in a hoodie, headphones in, barely registered him. 2 women deep in conversation, gesturing expressively, who parted slightly to let him pass and closed back together without a break in their sentence. A teenage boy on a skateboard who looked at him only to assess whether he'd be in the way of his line. Nobody stopped. Nobody pointed. Nobody said anything at all. By the time he turned back toward home, Callum's hands had unclenched and his breathing had settled, and there was something in his chest that he could only describe as enormous, quiet relief. The world had received Celeste without even knowing it was doing anything remarkable. She had simply been a woman on an evening walk. And she had been, for the entire 15 minutes, exactly herself. He came home and sat on the kitchen floor for a while, because the couch felt too far, and he didn't want to move that much yet. He sat there in the dusty rose dress with his back against the refrigerator and his knees drawn up, and he smiled at the ceiling until the smile dissolved into something that was half laughter and half tears. Then he got up, poured himself a glass of wine, and opened his phone. There was work to do. The Instagram account began as an archive private, accessible only to Callum himself, a visual diary of the evenings he spent as Celeste. He had a good eye, honed by years of working in marketing and understanding how images communicated. He knew the difference between a photograph that simply existed and one that actually said something. He knew about light and framing and the subtle editorial decisions that transform a snapshot into a portrait. He applied this knowledge to himself not with vanity, but with the same care and attention he gave to any project he cared about. The photographs he took of Celeste were good from the beginning. Not technically perfect, he was working with a phone camera and a window and a cheap ring light he'd ordered online, but honest, and honesty in a photograph is something no amount of technical equipment can manufacture. His images had warmth. They had presence. The subject in them looked like someone who knew herself. He kept the account private for 3 months. Then, one evening, he sat with the privacy settings for a long time before switching the account to public. He posted a photograph the next morning. Morning light from the east window, a simple floral blouse in pale blue, his hair loose, a neutral makeup look. The caption was 3 words, "Good morning." Finally. By evening, the post had 43 likes from accounts he'd never encountered, and 6 comments. "Beautiful," one said. "Is this your first public post?" "Welcome. You look radiant," said another. "Love the blouse." The caption said it all. "Sending love," wrote a third. Callum sat reading these comments with a focused, slightly disbelieving attention of someone receiving something they'd given up expecting. Then he read them again. Then he opened his drafts folder, which contained 19 other photographs he'd taken over the past 3 months and never posted, and he posted one of those too. Over the following weeks, at Celeste, Reeves' studio began to grow. Not overnight, and not without effort, Callum applied the same strategic thinking to Celeste's online presence that he applied professionally to brand building, because he understood the mechanisms and he wasn't above using them. He was consistent. He posted regularly, mixing outfit photographs with more personal, reflective content, a caption about what it meant to dress the way you wanted after years of not allowing yourself to, a short piece about the particular freedom of a city that doesn't know your history, a photograph taken from behind, looking out over the Chicago skyline in a long dress, with a caption that just said, "She waited a long time to see this view." That post went, relatively speaking, everywhere. The follows came quickly after that, not in the millions, nothing viral or overwhelming. But enough. Enough to create the warm, genuine community that Callum had quietly needed for longer than he'd known. People who understood what Celeste was navigating, who recognized the texture of her experience and responded with recognition rather than curiosity. People who sent long messages about their own journeys and asked thoughtful questions, and occasionally just said, "I needed to see this today. Thank you." Celeste's online world became, in ways that mattered profoundly, a lifeline. But it was also, slowly and inevitably, a container she was beginning to outgrow. The message arrived on a Tuesday evening in October. It was not, by the objective metrics of message quality, particularly elaborate. It was 4 lines, simply written, with no rhetorical showmanship or performative warmth, just clean, direct language delivered by someone who apparently believed that if he meant what he was saying, he didn't need to dress it up. "Hi, Celeste. I've been following your account for about 2 months now. Your posts are some of the most quietly brave things I've read online. I'm not sure if this is forward, but I wondered if you'd ever be open to meeting someone for coffee or dinner. No expectations. I'm just drawn to the person behind these photographs, and I'd like to meet them. Remy." Callum read it 3 times. The profile attached to the message belonged to someone named Remy Delacroix, 38 years old, based in Chicago, working in architecture. His account was modest and genuine. Photographs of buildings he found interesting, occasional portraits, a few landscape images from trips, a handful of personal posts that revealed, without overexposure, someone thoughtful and curious and present in the world. His face appeared in maybe 6 of the posts, a lean face with dark eyes, an easy open smile, the particular ease of someone who hasn't spent much time performing for cameras. No red flags. No performative anything. Just a real person extending a genuine invitation. Callum put the phone down and sat with it for a while. The fear arrived first, as it always did, the reliable inventory of everything that could go wrong. The possibility of someone who said one thing and meant another. The possibility of exposure in a way he couldn't control. The possibility of sitting across from a real person in his feminine self and having that person look at him differently than they'd looked at the photographs. But underneath the fear, something else. Something that felt, if he was honest, like longing. He picked the phone back up and typed a reply. "Hi, Remy. Thank you for this. It's a genuinely kind message. I'd be open to meeting. Dinner, I think, rather than coffee. Somewhere with good lighting. Celeste." She sent it before the fear had time to negotiate. The evening of the dinner, Callum began getting ready 2 hours early. This was not unusual. His preparation had always been thorough, but tonight there was a different quality to the process. A deliberateness that went beyond routine, as though each choice carried additional weight, as though the outfit and the face and the shoes were not just Celeste's expression of herself, but her ambassador to an entirely new world. He stood before the open wardrobe for a long time. His hands moved through the dresses with a practiced lightness, touching the fabric of each one, considering and setting aside. The jewel tones felt too formal. The pastels too casual. He needed something that was both elevated and honest, that said, "I dress this way because it's who I am, not I dress this way to impress you." He found it mid-left, where it had been hanging for several months, waiting for exactly the right occasion. A deep garnet wrap dress, clean lines, a silk-like fabric that moved beautifully, a V-neckline that was present without being excessive. It cinched naturally at the waist and fell to just below the knee, with a particular quiet elegance of a piece that doesn't need to announce itself because it's simply, undeniably right. She had bought it 3 months ago without a specific occasion in mind, knowing only that she would need it eventually. This, evidently, was eventually. She laid it on the bed and turned to the makeup station. The skincare first, as always toner, serum, the good moisturizer that her skin had needed since October, when the Chicago wind had started drawing the moisture from everything. She pressed it in gently, watching in the mirror as her complexion settled and brightened. Foundation next. She had learned over years of practice that the foundation was architecture. Everything built on top of it either succeeded or failed, depending on how well the base was laid. She applied it with a damp sponge in the technique she'd learned from a 3-year-old video she'd watched more times than she could count. Pressing, not wiping, building coverage gradually rather than dumping it all at once. Concealer under the eyes, a shade lighter than her foundation, blended outward with a tiny brush. Contour, which she executed the way a surgeon operates. Clean lines, soft blending, knowing exactly which angles to strengthen and which to soften. Her jawline was her point of most deliberate attention, and she gave it the time it deserved. The eyes tonight were more considered than usual. She chose a warm copper shadow for the lid, blended into a deep brown in the crease and along the lower lash line, creating a smoldering warmth that complemented the garnet of the dress without competing with it. Liner drawn as a fine upper lash line, just enough to define without hardening. Mascara applied in 2 coats, letting the first dry fully before the second. A detail that separated a flat, clumping application from the kind of open, lifted lash she wanted. Then the lip. She had 3 candidates open on the counter: a deep burgundy that felt slightly dramatic for a first dinner, a neutral mauve that she sometimes reached for on lower-pressure evenings, and a warm, deeply pigmented raspberry that sat between the two. She tried the raspberry. It was perfect. She looked at the final result for a long time. Not with the anxious critical assessment she'd once brought to the mirror, the scanning for flaws, the cataloging of imperfections, the habitual diminishment. Just with looking, with the genuine, unhurried willingness to see what was there. What was there was a woman who was going to dinner. A woman who had spent years learning to be herself, one careful evening at a time. A woman who was, tonight, meeting someone who might be worth being known by. Celeste picked up her clutch, stepped into her heels, and walked out the door. She hailed a cab 2 blocks from the apartment, stepping in with the unhurried confidence of someone who had been doing this for long enough that the novelty had given way to simply living. The driver, whose name, as she read on the dash, was Marcus, glanced in the rearview mirror as she settled into the seat, and his expression moved through the brief, natural sequence of someone just got in my cab into something warmer. Good evening. You headed somewhere nice tonight?
Dinner, she said.
Oleanders on Wells. Good choice. They do the short rib there that'll change your life. He pulled into traffic with the practiced ease of someone who has driven these streets long enough to read them like a language. Special occasion? She considered this. A first one. First time meeting someone in person. Ah, Marcus said sagely. A first date. Something like that. In the rearview mirror, his eyes had a warmth that wasn't intrusive, just human, the natural warmth of someone who finds people interesting and hasn't trained himself out of it. Well, if you don't mind me saying, whoever it is has no idea how lucky they're about to be. Celeste looked at her hands in her lap and found she was smiling. That's very kind. Not kind. Just honest. He navigated around a slow-moving delivery truck with a patient ease. I've been driving cabs for 12 years. I see a lot of people. Most of them are just going somewhere. Every now and then somebody gets in, and I can tell they're going somewhere that matters. You've got that look.
She thought about that.
I think it does matter. More than I've let things matter in a while. That's a good feeling, that. When something finally matters again. They rode in companionable silence for the next few blocks, the city moving past in its reliable evening rhythm, the restaurants filling up, the office buildings emptying out, the particular democratic energy of a city at 7 p.m. where everyone is on their way somewhere. When they arrived at the restaurant, Marcus stopped at the curb and turned slightly in his seat.
Hey.
I hope it goes well tonight. Thank you, Marcus. Take care of yourself. She stepped out into the warm amber light of the restaurant's entrance and felt, as she often did in these moments, the transition from private to public, from inside the cab to outside in the world, the particular clear-aired sensation of being exactly where she was supposed to be. She pushed open the door. He was already there. She saw him before he saw her. He was standing near the host's stand rather than seated, which she had not expected, and which told her something immediately, because the instinct to stand and wait was the instinct of someone who wanted to be present for the arrival rather than already comfortable in their own space. He was taller than his photographs had suggested, wearing dark trousers and a soft navy shirt, his dark hair slightly longer than it looked in his posts. He was looking at his phone with the distracted patience of someone who had arrived a few minutes early and was filling the time without particularly needing to. Then he looked up. She watched his face move through the recognition. Not shock, nothing jarring or uncomfortable, just the clean, clear process of matching a person to a picture and finding that they were real and present and somewhat better than a picture in the way that real people always are. He smiled. It was the easy, genuine smile of someone whose face had practiced that expression long enough for it to be completely natural. "Celeste," he said, and extended his hand. She took it. "Remy." "It's really good to meet you," he said. Not performed, not too much. Just true. "You too," she said. And they were led to their table, a corner booth, warmly lit, the kind of restaurant placement that creates its own small world, and the evening began. Oleander's was the kind of restaurant that understood, instinctively, that good dining is about more than food. It was about the quality of the silence between courses, the way the lighting made every person at every table look like someone worth knowing, the particular grace of staff who were attentive without being hovering. Their table had a small candle at the center that threw everything into warm relief, and for the first half hour of their dinner, Celeste found herself acutely aware of how different this was from the evenings she'd spent alone in the apartment. Dressed as herself in the warm lamplight, how similar the quality of the warmth was, and how fundamentally altered by the presence of another person. Remy was a good conversationalist. Not in the showy, performance-driven way of someone who has rehearsed their best anecdotes in the quieter, more valuable way of someone who is genuinely interested in what the other person had to say. He asked questions that were specific rather than generic. He listened without waiting for his turn to speak. He disagreed, occasionally and gently, on things he had actual opinions about, rather than offering the seamless agreement of someone prioritizing smoothness over authenticity. "Tell me something about yourself that your Instagram doesn't say," he said early, after they'd ordered. She considered this. "I'm very good at cooking, and I never have anyone to cook for." He laughed, a real laugh, not curated. "That's a very specific sadness." "It's a smaller sadness than it sounds. I've mostly made peace with it." "What about you? What do the architecture posts leave out?" "That I'm terrible at sleeping," he said easily. "I do my best thinking at 2 a.m., and I've stopped fighting it. My best work has almost all started from 2 a.m. ideas that I wrote down on whatever was closest." "What do you write them on?" He reached into his jacket pocket and produced, without ceremony, a small dog-eared notebook. "Mostly this." She looked at it, a well-loved object, clearly carried everywhere, its cover soft with handling. "May I?" "Not yet," he said, tucking it back. "Maybe eventually. Maybe eventually." The phrase sat between them pleasantly, carrying its small, warm weight. They talked through the appetizers and into the main course, not the performative back and forth of two people trying to impress each other, but the easier, more irregular flow of two people finding each other interesting. He told her about the building he was currently designing, a community art center on the south side, about the particular challenge of creating a space that felt grand and intimate simultaneously. She told him about the company she worked for in the daytime, a marketing firm with good clients and excellent colleagues, and an almost complete absence of anyone who knew the other half of her life. "Does that bother you?" he asked. "The separation?" She took a sip of wine. "It used to bother me more than it does now. I've gotten better at valuing the things I've built on my own terms, the account, the evenings, the version of my life that looks the way I want it to. But yes, there's something tiring about carrying a self that doesn't know the other self exists." He nodded slowly. "That makes a lot of sense. You say that like you understand it from the inside." "Maybe a little," he said. "Not the same way you do. But I grew up in a family where being an artist was not encouraged. Architecture was fine because it's practical. But what I actually wanted to do was design spaces for experiences rather than buildings for function, and for years I kept that version of the vision very quiet because I didn't trust the room I was in with it." He paused. It's different, obviously. But the shape of it, the thing you carry that you haven't shown people, I recognize the silhouette. She looked at him.
Yes, she said.
That's exactly the right word for it. The silhouette. They ordered dessert, a shared dark chocolate torte that arrived looking nearly too elegant to eat and tasted better than that, and somewhere in the course of eating it, the conversation shifted again into territory that felt even more personal, even more true. Can I tell you something honest? She said. That's what I'm here for, he said. The candlelight held the moment. She set down her fork and looked at him with the particular steadiness of someone who is prepared for this and is going to do it properly, regardless of how it lands. The person you've been talking to tonight, Celeste, she's real, she began. She is completely, genuinely real. But she's not the only person I am. My full name is Callum Reeves. When I'm not Celeste, I live as a man. I present as a man at work and with my family and in most of the world. This who I am tonight, who I am in the photographs you followed, is something I've been keeping private for most of my adult life, and I've only started bringing into the world recently. She paused. I wanted to tell you this now because I felt tonight that you were someone worth being honest with. And I didn't want to spend more time with you if there's more time to be spent on a foundation that had something important missing. Remy held her gaze throughout. His expression moved through the listening quietly, not with the flicker of withdrawal she had dreaded, not with the performance of extravagant acceptance either, just the concentrated, genuine attention of someone actually receiving what was being said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you for telling me. I can hear how much it cost, and I want you to know it means something that you chose to." She exhaled. "Does it change anything?" she asked. Not testing, not pressuring. Just needing to know. He thought about it, really thought, rather than reaching for the quickest reassuring answer. "No," he said finally. "Not in the way you might be worried about. It adds things. It makes some things more complex, and I'd be pretending if I said I didn't need a little time to orient to it properly. But it doesn't make me less interested in knowing you. Both of you. All of you." A pause. "If that's something you'd want." She looked at him across the candle. "I think I'd want that," she said quietly. "Yes." They declined dessert, ultimately neither of them particularly wanting the evening to end, but both understanding that good endings sometimes require leaving a plate unfinished. Outside on the pavement, the October night was brisk and clear, the kind of Chicago cold that hasn't yet become committed to its winter self but is beginning to make its intentions known. Celeste had brought a coat, a long camel coat she loved, and she pulled it around herself as they stood for a moment, deciding what the evening would do next. "Walk," Remy suggested. "Walk," she agreed. They went north, following the river. The river walk at this hour was quiet enough for conversation but alive enough not to feel lonely. Scattered couples, the occasional runner, a small group gathered near a fire feature outside a bar, their faces lit from below in amber warmth. Remy walked beside her with the comfortable, natural proximity of someone who had already decided that this person was worth being physically close to, not encroaching, not possessive, just present in the way that communicates, without requiring words. They talked about everything and nothing. He told her about a building in Barcelona he'd been trying to find a reason to visit for 2 years. She told him about the dress she'd almost bought instead of the garnet one and why she'd decided against it. He made her laugh at a story about a client who had insisted on a feature in a design that was structurally impossible and who, when told this, had simply said, "Let's make it work," as though architectural physics were a negotiating position. At a point where the river curved and the city lights reflected off the water in long, broken columns, they stopped and stood at the railing. "I want to tell you something," Remy said. "Okay. I followed your account for 2 months before I messaged you. And in that time, I read every caption you posted at least twice." He was looking at the water. "You write about being seen in a way that sounds like someone who has wanted it for a very long time and is just starting to let themselves have it." She thought about this. "That's accurate," she said. "I think that's rare," he said. "Most people have either stopped wanting to be seen or they want to be seen too much. You're somewhere in the middle. You want it, but you haven't made desperation out of it. You want the genuine article." "Yes," she said. "That's exactly right." He turned from the water to look at her. The city light was very kind on both of them. "I'd like to be part of that," he said simply. The being seen. If that makes sense. It makes complete sense, she said. A pause. Not uncomfortable, the opposite. Do you want to keep walking? Yes, she said. Good. They walked. They found a late-night cafe 2 blocks from the river, the kind that exists in cities for the people who aren't ready to go home yet. A warm, small room with mismatched furniture and an espresso machine that was slightly too loud for the space, and music that was chosen, clearly, by someone who genuinely loved music. They took a corner table and ordered hot drinks and sat in the easy, pleasantly tired way of 2 people who have been talking all evening and have not yet run out of things to say. At some point, in the comfortable lull between one topic and the next, Remy reached across the table and set his notebook open to a blank page. Favorite building you've ever been inside, he said, pen ready. She blinked. Are you taking notes? I'm collecting data. For what? Don't know yet. Favorite building. She thought for a moment. There's a public library in my hometown. Not grand, it's a small town, so it's a modest building. But they had these big east-facing windows, and in the morning the light came through in these long, warm panels across the floor and the shelves. I used to go on Saturday mornings when I was young and just sit in the light. He wrote something down. Yours, she said. The Salk Institute in La Jolla. I went once, on a research trip. The way the water channel runs down the center, the way it directs your attention to the horizon, it understands exactly what it wants to say and says nothing else. I've thought about it almost every day since. That's a beautiful answer. I had a while to think about it. She laughed. He closed the notebook and tucked it back in his pocket. Outside, when they finally stepped back into the night, colder now, genuinely October at midnight, they stood on the pavement for the particular moment that always exists at the end of a good evening, the one where 2 people know something has started and are simply standing in the knowledge of it together. Next weekend, Remy said. If you're free. I'm free, she said. I'll send you options. You can tell me which one sounds right. Okay. A pause. Celeste, he said. Not testing the name, just using it. Naturally, easily, the way you say something you've decided to mean. Remy, she said back. He smiled. She smiled. She walked away down the pavement in the garnet dress and the camel coat, her heels quiet on the pavement, the city enormous and warm and indifferent around her. And she was so entirely herself that it felt like flying. She woke the next morning as Callum, naturally, simply, in the ordinary way of a Sunday morning, and lay in bed for a while listening to the city coming alive outside the window. The garnet dress was on its hanger. The wig was on its stand. The clutch was on the dresser where she'd placed it the night before. The makeup brushes were washed and drying. Everything was exactly where it belonged. He thought about the previous evening with the slow, unhurried attention of someone turning something beautiful over in their hands. The dinner, the river walk, the cafe. Remy's face in the candlelight. The particular quality of being seen, fully, by someone who had chosen to remain in the knowing of you. His phone was on the nightstand. He picked it up. There was a message from Remy, sent at 11:47 p.m. just after he'd gotten home. I've been thinking about the library you described. The light through the east windows. I think you've been that library your whole life, something beautiful that was only ever properly seen by the people who were paying attention. I'm glad I was paying attention. Sleep well. Callum read it twice. Then he set the phone down and looked at the ceiling for a while. He was 35 years old, and he had spent a significant portion of those years believing that the fullness of who he was would always be something only he could hold, too complex, too particular, too difficult to carry across the distance between 2 people without losing something essential in translation. He was, it seemed, beginning to be wrong about that. He got up, started the coffee, and opened his laptop to check his work email with the brisk, competent energy of Callum Reeves on a Sunday morning. Then, because it was right to, he opened Instagram. He posted a photograph from the night before, one he'd taken at the Riverwalk, the river behind her, the city lights reflected in the water, Celeste in the garnet dress with her hand resting on the railing and her face turned slightly toward the camera. She looked like someone who had just arrived somewhere she'd been trying to get to for a very long time. The caption was simple. Last night was everything I needed it to be. Thank you to everyone who has been here with me on this journey. It's only just beginning. See. The The notifications came back immediately, warm and genuine. She read them with her coffee in both hands, the morning light falling through the east window in exactly the right way. Here is what Callum came to understand in the months that followed. Identity is not a problem to solve. It is not a conflict to resolve, a gap to close, a disorder to manage, or a secret to contain. It is simply the full, complex, beautiful truth of what a person is, and the only real question is not what is it, but who do you let into the knowing of it? He and Remy took things slowly. Not out of uncertainty, but out of respect for the weight of what was being shared, for the particular care that real things deserve. They had dinner again the following Saturday and the Saturday after that. Remy came to the apartment one evening in November and saw all of it: the wardrobe, the makeup station, the photographs on the wall, the full landscape of Celeste's world, and moved through it with the attentive, respectful curiosity of someone who understood that this was being trusted with something precious. "Can I ask you something?" he'd said, standing before the open wardrobe with a particular focused attention he brought to architecture. "Of course. Does she have a favorite?" He gestured at the dresses.
Callum looked at them.
"The garnet one," he said. "The one I wore the night we met." Remy nodded slowly. "Good choice," he said. It was the right beginning. Over time, the boundaries that had once separated Callum's two worlds began to soften, not collapsing, not dissolving, but becoming more permeable, more honest. He told two close colleagues, good people, people he had earned the right to trust, and their responses were the responses of people who were genuinely surprised but genuinely unperturbed. He began attending some social events as Celeste, with Remy beside him, and found that the world was generally more interested in other things than his identity, and that the few people who looked a beat too long were vastly outnumbered by the people who simply looked and moved on. His family remained, for the time being, a future chapter, one he was writing slowly, with care, knowing that some conversations require patience and cannot be rushed without being damaged. That chapter had its own timeline, and he was learning to respect it. The Instagram account continued to grow quietly, genuinely, without the manufactured strategy of virality. Just Celeste, posting photographs and captions with the consistency of someone who had finally decided that she deserved to take up space in the world and was acting accordingly. And Callum, who wore suits and ties on weekday mornings and ran campaigns that won awards and ate lunch at his desk and answered to his real name in every room he walked into. Callum carried both of his names with the settled, unashamed confidence of someone who had finally stopped treating one of them as a secret. They were both his. He was, in both of them, entirely himself. The city sparkled outside the window on a Friday evening in late November, and Callum Reeves sat at his kitchen table in a soft cream blouse and wide-legged trousers, his makeup on, his coffee hot, his phone propped against the fruit bowl playing a playlist he had put together for exactly this kind of quiet evening. Remy was coming over in an hour. The garnet dress was on its hanger. Everything was exactly where it belonged.